Psychotechnologies live. Woo! Welcome to the stream. I'm excited.
This time is a very special episode. Being for real, because we have a very special guest.
Ultra super special guest. I'll keep it to I'm Shayna and I am your wife.
Yep. Shayna the wife. Okay, so we've got psychometric testing. Tell me what happened.
Yeah.
Psychometric testing. Yeah. So we had the opportunity to get some test results that belong to Daniel because we were doing some training, and so we needed to do the test anyway. And we needed to score them up. So we've got tests and we got scores. And Daniel, turns out, is a very interesting person, as I'm sure.
So these are neuropsychological tests, right?
It's true. Okay. More context.
What is a neuropsychological test?
What is a neuropsychological test, husband? A neuropsychological test, well, there are many neuropsychological tests, but essentially they're looking at how a person's abilities with a lot of different cognitive skills. So things like your ability to pay attention to stuff, remember stuff, make sense of things, compares either to, a previous testing that you did, or more frequently to other people who are the same age as you, same gender, same level of education. So like sort of how you're doing.
So like how smart am I?
So some of it is how smart you are, but some of it is also other things that we wouldn't necessarily typically think of as like smart, like how fast you tap your finger is like not usually considered how smart you are, but it's also part of neuropsychological testing, because if you have a stroke, that can be affected.
So it's like how well does my neurons work, or my nervous system?
How well is your brain functioning in a lot of different ways? And then that maps onto is basically the relationship between the brain and your behavior, the brain and your cognitive abilities. So sort of trying to tap into that. But some of the stuff that I do is also sort of basic academic testing. So not like a test like that you study for, but like, okay, like how good are your math skills, or how good are your reading skills and things like that. And some of it is straight up, intelligence testing as we typically think of it. So you got a whole bunch of results.
Cool. So you tested my whole, I guess, central nervous system and brain.
I did not test your whole central nervous system because I barely tested your spinal cord.
Okay. But
not really your brainstem either. I just sort of like made some assumptions about that.
Okay.
So
from like the brains, from right up, everything superior to the brainstem.
I didn't do a sensory motor exam. There's definitely we could have done
like cognition.
Your cognition.
Like being like, Daniel, how many fingers do you have?
I have a lot.
Oh no.
More than 3, less than 20.
Okay, cool. Good. Just checking, want to be safe.
Yeah. So it wasn't there are many more things that I could have done.
Okay.
If I were, really, really concerned and had no idea which direction to go, and was very concerned about your brain and your central nervous system. But
you kind of just did the most complex things, and then
I did the things that are most relevant to neuropsychological work, right? Like I'm not a neurologist. I'm not trying to check whether you have
neuropsychological.
Right. Like I'm not, I'd be very personally interested if you had like some kind of like a degenerative spinal condition or something, but it's not within the scope of neuropsychology.
Okay. Cool.
I will let you know.
For the record, this was like 5 hours long or something, the test, or longer.
So he completed testing between about 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.
Okay.
No breaks for lunch.
Jesus, that's exhausting.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's really a lot.
My ADD was not doing well.
So that's some of the interesting stuff that we have to talk about. So I don't know if you want to start with the I'm going to skip all the normal. There's lots of medium
So some of me is normal, which
There
is
are
a bit of a surprise to everyone.
many aspects of you where of your neuropsychological functioning that are really nothing to write home about and are just operating properly, and that's great.
Cool.
So I'm
Let's talk
imagining
about the
nobody
stuff
cares.
that's not bad.
So should we start with the stuff that's operating very poorly, or the stuff that's operating very well, or like
Elliot, what are you interested in?
what's interesting?
How do you want this to go?
I want to go with the weird. Let's go with the weird first, and then like we can counter it with the that actually he's completely fine in this area, but he is weird.
Oh,
with reasons.
Like the
So you want
positive weird
bad
and
first
negative?
and then
Yeah, yeah.
weirdly
The bad first. Let's go for the bad first.
bad first.
Okay.
Okay. So the worst of all of the things is actually essentially his certain aspects of his attention / processing speed. So attention is a very complex thing. But he alluded to before, he's been previously diagnosed with ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is a neurodevelopmental disorder.
Mhm.
It starts in childhood, and as many people know, it involves either difficulties with inattentiveness, so you sort of like make lots of errors, you're losing things, you forget to bring your stuff to school, you make like you're sort of not really present, which is the typified by like the joke of like, I have AD, whoop, a squirrel, and then and then there's the hyperactive type, which is exactly as it sounds, a person who has way more energy than is helpful in our society today. So one thing that I want to like really, really highlight here is that with a lot of these neurodevelopmental disorders, they're really not like they're sort of a label for like what's happening with this kid is not the way that we want things to be for school, more than anything else.
Particularly
Like,
school-oriented thinking.
It's very much like, well, not just school, like home. It's just stuff that's like not functioning. Like it's a match problem between the kid and the environment, right? And so we tend to sort of pathologize it as like there's something wrong with this kid. But like if you think about it, something like dyslexia, where the person is, has difficulties reading, like is that a brain like it is a difficulty in the brain, right? But our brains didn't evolve to read, right? It's a thing that we sort of imposed, right? And some of it is like very like with like difficulties with spelling, for example, it's a huge problem in English because we've got a real shitty language, right? Nobody has difficulties with spelling in Italian.
Really? Huh.
It's very consistent. If it makes this sound, you spell it this way. So there is no like disorder of expression really, or it would be much more difficult to have one in Italian. It's not because Italian kids are smarter than English speaking kids. It's just it's a match, if that makes sense.
That's super interesting. I wonder what happens with languages that are like one character per word. Do people have spelling issues there?
I'm not sure.
Because that's a
think a
completely
lot of-
different language written structure.
Yeah. So like traditional Chinese, or
Yeah.
I mean, I'll simplify Chinese, but less so. I'm not quite sure. I think a lot of those characters are made up of
Smaller characters.
different. Yeah. So it's, I wonder if that affects it. And it's sort of like you're spelling, but you're spelling like on top of instead of next to.
Yeah.
Sense.
Yeah. Interesting.
But I'm not sure. Anyway, so keep that in mind. So, I mean, I think you were diagnosed with a mixed type, so both inattentive and hyperactive when you were a kiddo. And I'd say that's probably still pretty true.
You were diagnosed when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And
the sorry, go ahead.
I thought it was more like an adult discovery, but it was actually when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Not that it helped when.
12 or 13.
Right. Okay.
And I actually saw a report from a psychoeducational assessment that he did when he was a kid, which was also quite interesting. And interesting how things have changed over time and not changed. But it's interesting with him, right? Because I think he was quite hyperactive when he was a kid. And most kids who are hyperactive get less hyperactive as adults, right? But it still result like often like you have this like sort of restlessness kind of like you're not like jumping out of your skin physically quite the same way as you are when you're a kid, but it's still there. It just comes out a little bit differently in adults and kids. Does that map onto your experience?
Yeah. I'm definitely like stimulus seeking, as you call it.
Stimulus seeking.
Yeah.
So that's a different part of the assessment that we did.
Oh,
Yeah. So anyway, so in terms of the attention, so I would expect as a person who's been previously diagnosed with attention issues that he would have attention issues, right? And
Right.
so, and typically people with ADHD also have problems with processing speed, which is the speed at which you can get through cognitive processes,
Mhm.
right? But it's not the same as just being slow, because they're often fast, right, with the hyperactivity, but they can't modulate. So they're sort of either fast and inaccurate or slow and accurate, but they can't like keep the attention going quickly and consistently and get it all right. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he got, right? So he had some some of the processing speeds stuff that he did was in what we call the low average range. So that's sort of about the 16th percentile overall, which might sound low, but the truth is that with the way that's
so it's
right. So it's really not terrible, but it's not great either, right? Like it's not something where I would expect that if you had a conversation with a person with that processing speed that you'd be like, okay, come on already, right? This, nothing's getting through, right? But then he had another processing, a selective attention test essentially, where he ended up in the average range, but above 50%, at 50th percentile. I don't know if I should explain percentiles or not.
Quickly.
Okay. So percentiles are how you compare to the rest of the population. So if you're at the 50th percentile, then that means 50% of people are better than you at it, and 50% of people are worse than you at it. If you're at the 75th percentile, that means 25% of people are better than you at it, and 75% of people are worse than you at it.
Right.
Given your demographics.
Right. I mean,
Oh.
depending on the test. So he ended up like above the 50th percentile, but still average in terms of his speed, but his accuracy was at the first percentile. So 99% of people are more accurate than him when he's trying to go quickly and not really paying attention so much to the errors. Right?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
And from the inside, like I kind of know this, and that's why I always try to do things slow and carefully, because otherwise it's just all mistakes.
Right. And even more interestingly, if you look at the difference on that between the speed and the accuracy, that only happens in 1 out of 1,000 people. Like the gap between the speed and the accuracy. Because he was like totally fine on speed, and then the accuracy was pretty terrible. So and also on that test, like he started out pretty like pretty okay. You can see here the errors. I don't want to show it on the screen because it's a little, sort of a little bit too giving away too much, but he starts out with like no errors, one error. And then like as he goes on, okay, 7 errors per like block, like 15-second block, more and more and more errors over time.
It's like
right? Which,
getting bored and distracted over time.
right.
Yeah.
It gets boring, right? But these processing speed, selective attention kind of tests are boring. They are not, the content is not meaningful. The content is not interesting.
Yeah.
It's just because we're trying to like sap, like essentially with neuropsychological testing, you're trying to test, okay, I just want this little bit, right? And then I just want that little bit, right? Because you want to know exactly where the problem is, right? So if you mix interesting and like basic attention, it's no longer basic attention. It's now, like, can you pay attention to stuff that you like, right?
It's like somebody was in the meaning crisis space and they're learning about meaning and agent and reader relationships and what makes things meaningful. And then they took that and they're like, how can I make a thing the most meaningless possible?
Yeah.
And then they made me do that.
Right.
It's like fascinating. At some point, you're like, it's horseshit. You get all the way at the end, and you're like, it's fascinating how boring this is. Like,
no,
well,
because your attention is on the task, so I don't have enough like.
Right. He was literally singing to himself through these because he didn't have the to like tolerate how boring it was.
I've seen like 4-year-olds do that too. Like,
yeah, right, exactly. So, and then you can see here, Daniel, again, I'm not going to show it on the screen, but I'm looking at it on my screen. This happens again with our working memory stuff. So working memory is the ability to hold things in your head short term to work with it, right? So things like remembering a phone number while you're dialing it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So again, we've got more boring and more interesting, or in the case of people who don't have ADHD, easier and more complicated, right?
Because if you engage them, then they'll be happy.
Right. So if you have a person who doesn't have the difficulties that Daniel has, they'll typically do better on things that are easier. Make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's less.
But not for Daniel, right? So
if it's too easy, it gets hard.
If it's too easy for Daniel, he can't engage, right? So he ended up in the 9th percentile, which is what we'd call borderline impaired, right? So 91% of people are better than him at just remembering a string of numbers in the order that I say them, right? So I say 3, 2, 1, 4, and then he says 3, 2, 1, 4. He's bad at that, right? And then when he has to do it in backwards order, he's average. And when he has to sort the numbers in order, he's average. And then when he has to do math in his head, he's high average.
Oh, you're high average.
Right? So here we see like there's this like slope. Okay, it's boring. I can't, like, he can't do it. He can't gather, the herd of cats in his head to like, focus on the past. Right. But then it becomes a little bit more interesting. Not that I don't think it was pleasant to be doing like verbal math problems in your head, probably.
It was hard. It was actually fun it was like fun, but then it got hard. It started getting exhausting because there's a lot of them.
Yeah. But and they get harder and harder as it goes.
They were getting harder, and then over time it became really hard to do.
Yeah. But he did better than 75% of people do. Right. So we go there from 9th percentile in an easy attention task to 75th percentile in a hard attention task.
Okay,
right?
Interesting.
Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm immediately going to like, I wonder if I can work with this, that like keep him engaged even when tasks are easy. Like there's a lot of from the sort of coaching or like flow states perspective of like remaining in the zone of maximal development, or zone of like tasks need to be difficult enough or you get bored of them, and not too difficult or you get frustrated with them. And so
Right.
like keeping yourself in the zone of maximal flow is a skill in itself.
Yeah.
So that leads to as sort of the most epic, I guess, part of this whole thing.
Yep.
Which is that on what's called verbal comprehension, which is essentially the ability to like understand and work with verbal information. So things like, analogies, or how is this similar to that, or like how is this different from that, like solving verbal problems and expressing oneself well verbally.
Yep.
His overall abilities are in the 99th percent.
You're a virtuoso.
Right.
Yeah.
Because words are complicated.
Right.
Well, complicated enough that you're like entertained by them enough to stay on topic.
Yeah.
Right.
I actually really enjoy those tests. I was taking another before on that, and like it felt like it started
Wait.
when it started getting good.
So a moment ago, you were saying that this one aspect of the test was the most meaningless test possible. And they got you to do an arbitrarily pointless task. And then this one was like engaging and interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. Right. So this was engaging and
Like I
interesting
would play
and
that
fun.
game all the time.
Right.
Crazy.
Actually, we could make a game. Never mind.
Anyway, so he does better than 99% of people, 99 out of 100 people on that. And then otherwise, his stuff is pretty, like his perceptual reasoning, which is the analog that's not verbal. So solving like visual puzzles and things like that is, normal. That's the 66th percentile. Right. So it's a little bit above average, but it's not actually above average. That's in the average range, but it's above the mean. So I think some of the difficulties that Daniel has have to do with like having this fairly extreme difficulty holding his attention if he's bored. Right. But like, because he's so smart in a particular way, almost everything is boring.
Oh no. Oh no. Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know if that maps onto your experience, but like, yeah. So, if it's not on like really the bleeding edge of like meaning making,
Yeah.
it's
meaningless.
like,
like it doesn't exist.
It's like data entry levels of just.
So it's something like he's so smart that everything is boring and hard to pay attention to because he's just already unamused by it.
No.
This is what I'm trying to convince her, but she's not into that.
No.
Well,
because
it's a skill to maintain interest in like some of our prior podcasts, like back at number 10 or so, was like there's a skill to do the laundry even though it's a boring task, like a skill to be able to stay with it because it's important, enables other interesting things in life. Like,
yeah,
we've been talking about this for ages.
Yeah, it's more accurate to say that he's both gifted and disabled.
Oh no.
So and the gap there is, it could really not be bigger, right? Like 99th percentile is the highest score, and 0.1 percentile is the lowest score. Like,
I feel like
really?
we're playing a game of The Sims and we just gave him the character like this much in this trait and none in that trait, or like D&D.
He is the min-max.
I'm min-max.
Min-max.
He's extremely min-max. Yes. He is absolutely.
I don't recommend.
Daniel min-maxed.
Min-maxing is not a great way to go for functionality, right? Because it's, if it's so difficult for him to maintain attention on repetitive tasks, on tasks that are not, really, sort of cognitively engaging and difficult, right? One's life is made out of a lot of that stuff, right? Even if you are, brilliant engineer or whatever, right? There's still a lot of life is.
You might need to cook dinner sometimes or something. Like
cooking
you might
dinner,
need to act outside of your expertise.
checking your math work once you've already done the math, right? Like it's, whatever it is.
I remember that. I remember high school where they're like, you need to show you're working.
Right.
And I just did it all in my head and then wrote the number. And I'm like, why? Why do I have to show the working? I was good at math, but I was like, occasionally I'd do like shitty arithmetic errors.
Right. But you can't check your errors if you don't do the work, right? This is something I came up with this, the training that ended up with him being assessed, right? Where the trainee was not showing their work in certain ways that I wanted them to show their work. And my feedback is like, you need to show your work because I can't tell to what extent you did that properly if I don't know what happened. If I just know the final outcome, like I'm not sure if you did it right or not.
But it's the process. It's like process oriented.
Yeah. But that's boring and annoying.
If it's a complicated process, then that's interesting.
Yeah. But also I find with you not in the test, well, somewhat in the testing, because like, as I said, like you start out like relatively strong and then right, if things aren't getting harder. But things become boring to you quite fast as well.
Yeah.
It's hard for you to maintain your interest in things for over the long haul.
Yeah.
So it's it was a very interesting experience. And then another thing that I wanted to point out is that Daniel was at that time when he was a kiddo diagnosed with dyslexia, which is learning.
I've seen Daniel try and type things out or write things out. We had an episode talking about it too.
Yeah. So basically a learning disability, which dyslexia is a learning disability, is a situation where there's a gap between what we would expect of the person based on their general sort of intellectual functioning and some aspect of their academic functioning, right? So you don't diagnose if a person, let's say, has what's called an intellectual disability, where they have like overall low intelligence, low cognitive functioning, low functional abilities in day-to-day life. They don't also have dyslexia because they have difficulties with reading or writing, right? Because it's this what you would expect. It's that discrepancy again that makes it be learning disability rather than something else. So he had what is now known as a learning disorder of written expression, and at the time was known as dyslexia. Problem with dyslexia is that it could be either, it could mean reading or it could mean writing, and those are not the same. So he never had problems with, I mean, I don't know, very, very early in your life when you're first learning to read, but like by the time he was being assessed, he didn't have problems with reading, right? But he had problems with writing.
What?
Yeah,
I thought he had saying reading.
Reading comprehension I was very good at. Like I could read a thing and understand it very quickly. But like reading it out loud was a lot of work to learn that skill.
Yeah. But
Do
writing.
Do letters appear in different orders when you're trying to read them or anything?
Yeah, like I switch the letters all the time. But
when you're writing or when you're reading?
When I'm reading.
Oh, okay.
But it just doesn't really matter.
Yeah, because often you can read, like, the weird paragraph, you can read the words as long as the first and last letter are in the right spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like,
When you're trying to read them out loud, it's a problem. But if you're just trying to understand what the author is trying to say, it's like pretty fun.
Yeah. But I was quite impressed with Daniel. Now, I know over the course of our romantic relationship, he has worked very, very hard on his writing. And it shows in his, like, I can tell a huge difference over time in his writing skills. But it also showed on the testing. So when he was tested when he was in grade 8 or whatever it was, somewhere around like
I think it was grade 8. Yeah.
13, 14, whatever it was, he was in the second percentile for sort of written expression. And these are slightly different tests because this is, that was a kiddo test back in the 90s. This is an adult test in 2022.
But ostensibly they're testing the same thing.
It's not exactly, but similar. But now his spelling, at least, was in the 18th percentile, which is, again, low average, but you're going from impaired up to low average.
it's
right?
pretty good.
Which is huge game. Right?
Low average.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you end up going from an
It's like a
impaired
17
level,
percentile change, right?
yeah, and more importantly, it's going, from the bottom, from the impaired range all the way through the borderline impaired range and up into the middle of the low average range, right?
Yeah.
Which means that his spelling now. Granted, this is not as important as it used to be, right? Because most of us are typing most of the time, so his spelling is actually much more normal functionally because he uses a computer and then it spell checks.
I have an AI actually that now prompts me with the words that I should say. It's awesome.
He never has to write anything again.
No, I
But
still do, but
Do you use text to speech or anything?
I don't. And I don't know why. I just haven't like figured it out, like done it.
yeah, it's also it's an interesting, I dictate sometimes, not all the time, for work. And it's a weird, you can't just talk.
I know people who are good at it, and I'm like, I have no idea how you do it because I'd much rather type a thing out if given the choice. Unless my hands are busy.
Yeah. I mean, it depends what I'm doing. Sometimes I have to type in, like literally copy something when I'm like quoting something from somebody else's medical documentation. That I would much prefer to dictate because I could just read it and also say the punctuation while I'm going. Right?
That makes sense.
But if I'm, formulating something, especially if it takes some thought, I don't, I'd much prefer to type.
Yeah, I find I jump around as well conceptually.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also hard to like remember to just, be talking and then say comma, semicolon, period, end quote. Right.
Oh, you use semicolons?
I do.
Okay, you're one of those people.
I have a lot of things that are lists, but there are like commas inside the list. So I have to have like some other, so the list starts with a colon and then I say the thing that has commas and then a semicolon, next idea that has commas in it, semicolon.
It's like a meta comma.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm doing it properly, but at least the reader has like some idea what's going on.
I just double comma that, like put it next to each other.
So that's a way to go.
Okay, so I'm curious if you have like, knowing this now about Daniel, like strategies for suggestion around compensating for his existence. Like how should he best compensate with the fact that he's,
yeah, I want to know what this means now that we have
like should he now try and get other people to do boring things for him and try and get himself interesting things to do? Should he now like work on being able to do more boring things? Like should he, like what should he do? Because I mean test results are not usually not fixed in stone. He has some sort of ability to learn things, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, as evidenced by that,
He already did.
his written expression has improved dramatically. And this is a little bit different because the testing that he had when he was a kid was psychoeducational testing. So they didn't, it's a little different. I go into like more kind of detail on certain things that have to do with his brain function, and they go into more detail about certain things that have to do with his academic function. But anyway, I mean, I think Daniel does try to offload boring things onto other people and work on like higher level conceptual stuff. I think it's very difficult to manage that functionally, really, unless you're, very, lucky in a lot of ways, and you could just have like a small army of people who you can just send to do things.
I'm working on that.
Yeah, but if you can't afford to have a yacht with a whole staff, then it's a little bit rough to live your life that way.
With the suggestion, maybe you got to grow there, but become really, really wealthy, Daniel. That'll solve a lot of your problems.
Seriously, yeah. I really think it would.
Yeah, like I think if he, in some ways that's true, like because he does have, very strong strengths with some aspects of, of conceptualizing things, right? And thinking, abstract thinking, right? If he could just offload all the specifics onto other people all the time, then that would probably be much more enjoyable for him. It might work pretty well, but it's hard for if you're not Elon Musk, it's a little difficult to get that happening, and to get that happening while other people are, able and willing to tolerate it, right? Because other people don't. I also although I don't have the deficits that you have, right? I don't want to be doing all of the menial work.
Yeah. Right. Who does?
Very clear.
Well, the other direction is there ways he can train himself to be more okay at it and make less mistakes with it and be less bored with it? Because it's like, if he's in a place where menial work is currently torture, which I don't know if it is or is not true, it would be nice if it was just like, okay, from like if he could get from like torture to like, this is all right. That might be nice for him.
So I mean, the easy answer advocated by school systems in North America is drugs.
Right.
I mean, like amphetamines for ADHD, which is
like
not
meth?
what you like.
No, it's meth. Amphetamines seem weird.
Anyway. So, I mean, Ritalin, Concerta, those sorts of things are
I don't like that stuff.
are an option.
I particularly don't like very young people's brains being impacted by drug changes. Like brains are still forming, and then if you mess with their chemicals, they'll like do other weird forming things because they've got a bunch of weird chemicals in there.
I think you have to think about the counterfactual, right? Because it's not neutral to be like bouncing off the walls and getting in trouble and not learning anything in school, and like
it's true.
So, yeah, and like being wrong, kind of like where the whole world is telling you what you're doing is like who you are is wrong.
That's not very fun either. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. A problem.
So it's I think it's a case by case basis. I think people are like wildly over prescribing those medications to kids for things where either they have unrealistic expectations of what children could do at certain stages of development, or there are a bunch of other things. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, I don't work with kids, so like really take this with a grain of salt, but I do think that a lot of the time we over pathologize the child as what we call an identified patient, where there's a system problem, whether it be like a socioeconomic issue, a family issue,
classroom issue,
right? And it gets turned into a Bob Smith issue, right? And certainly he's suffering and he's engaging in behaviors that are not acceptable or helpful or whatever, but a lot of other things are really what needs to change. But it's easier to just give him drugs. But I do think that sometimes, legitimately, despite all best efforts and on other fronts and everything, like sometimes it is better to be on those kinds of medications than not. Although it's not perfect. So that's one option. Another option for ADHD is cognitive behavioral therapy.
That sounds really boring. Like, is he even going to get through the therapy given what he currently has?
Well, so
The CBT stuff, though, it's like the boring version of rationality. Like rationality is like CBT, but like if you took it seriously and went all out.
Another thing that I wonder if it would be helpful for Daniel is if he set up a much more formal meditative practice that was boring for him and like practiced bringing the attention back, and we bring the attention back again and again, you bring the attention back. I think that Daniel is very much into introspection and a lot of stuff that's really cool, right? But because it's really cool, it's not really getting at the deficit of being able to work with boring. And like with the work that you did in terms of your writing, right? You went at like, this is hard, but it's valuable, right? And I suck at it, and I'm breaking my teeth on it, but it's valuable, and I want to be able to do it, and I'm gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
Right.
But that was kind of interesting.
Right.
But I see how you're using this as a metaphor analogy.
Yeah. Right. So like, I wouldn't want to, like, if you are not my client, and but like, I wouldn't want to assign a person with similar things to just like, okay, well, now what I want you to do is enter 700,000 meaningless numbers into an Excel spreadsheet without making any errors, right? But
thanks, I'd rather be alive.
right. But if it was something like meditation where you can see where the value.
So I have done meditation on boring, like sat with boring and explored it and become interesting, and then the boring goes away, and then trying to like maintain that where I can pay attention to the boring, but it still exists. But I kind of did that, and no, it's not interesting anymore.
There's also there's the opposite one, which is maintain interesting, and like if you can grab interesting as the object and like get really good at doing that, then even in moments of boring, you can just find a new interesting thing, and that's another tool that could be handy. Like the entire opposite. So yes, capacity to be with boring and also like ability to find interesting are both like, they seem like opposite, but they can both support each other.
Right. So like, I'm sort of reminded of the like classic mindfulness exercise of like mindfully eating a raisin, right? And like, you got this boring old eating a raisin, and then you can make it extremely interesting and infinitely powerful. And you could do that, like you could mindfully wash the dishes and be like paying attention to the water flowing over your hands and like the sound.
It could actually be way more fun.
It could be way more fun. And also you're not gonna get a heck of a lot of dishes washed, right? Yeah. So there is value, there's definite value in that. And I think that it doesn't really address the core deficit, right? Because again, as soon as it becomes interesting, right, the span of the numbers forward, garbage, right? Got to do them backward order. Now I'm on board, right?
Yeah, sorting them was actually really interesting because you're giving me a lot of numbers at random, and then they started duplicating the numbers, and so I had to remember all the numbers, but I could like sort them as I was trying to remember them.
Is that so? As in sort, as in like I give you 13772, and you need to like repeat them back from highest to lowest.
No, 1, 2. Wait, am I allowed to say this?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
1, 2. Like I was at 1, 2, 3, 7, 7. Right.
Oh, right. So repeat them back from lowest to highest. Or
Right.
right. Okay. As opposed to like repeat them back in reverse order or forwards order.
So one of them was reverse order, which is like it's harder.
And then there's another one that he didn't do that's
But also the ordering
also has letters in it, and you got to sort all of them.
What? I didn't do that one.
No, you didn't do that.
I mean, it could be interesting to be like repeat them back odds then evens in upwards order, and then it gets to be very complicated.
Numbers in order, and then just drop all the rest.
Right.
Right. Like you make
super interesting.
But yeah, the other one was, but for that one also, like to remember them in order, the order is arbitrary.
The original order, or
yeah,
the
just
original
random numbers. Like once I can sort them, like now it's easier. Like if there's less,
more meaning.
There's less. Actually, there's less information. There's more meaning, but there's less information.
I guess so, in a way. Yeah.
So it's easier to remember because I don't have to remember the order of stuff. I'm just like, okay, like these numbers. And
these numbers happened.
Yeah, it's only like
particularly if he's bad at orders, like sequence of letters, like in the dyslexia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's also true. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, like you're making me do shit that's meaningless, and then being like, "Oh, you got it wrong." Oh, and like, dude, you just made that up.
Wait.
Like,
but to be clear, other people can just do the meaningless thing just fine, and you're the one having a real problem with it.
Those are normies who don't like them. No, I'm just kidding.
So that's
that's the thing. They can do a thing that you can't.
They could do a thing I can't, and that's impressive. It's like kind of magic.
Yeah.
But also, I don't like the fact that we like design our world in that way for that skill, just because they can do it.
Well, so that's the thing. Like we design our world over like sort of regression to the mean. We sort of expect like most people to be like kind of okay at.
Remember their phone number in the correct order of digits.
That has been a problem.
Yeah, I can only remember a couple phone numbers at the time.
I mean,
it took, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years of you having your number where like I no longer have to correct you like 25% of the time.
I was in depression a little bit at that time. So
okay, that's fair.
Earlier today, I was copying a number from one document to another, and I like one form to another form, and it was 8 digits, and I remembered it in my head, and I went, oh, look at that. I remembered it in my head, but I assume most people would have to do that in chunks or parts. Or
yeah. I mean, I think is it 7 plus or minus 1 is the span.
Yeah, it's supposed to be plus minus 2, depending on. Yeah. You can trade like heaps.
So that's the thing for like real life. Like I can make up a story, right? Like so I can take the number and I can create a story, and then it becomes meaningful, and then I use it. But for this, because they kept giving me so many, so I'd have to like make up a story and then like not get my stories confused. And like that's actually too complicated. Because it's like here's a thing and now forget it. Come up with a story and then immediately forget it and come up with another one and never get your story switched. I bet if I did improv, if I practiced improv.
That's another thing that I don't think I mentioned. I mentioned to you before, but in terms of your visual, your verbal memory was just like okay. There's nothing to write home about in any direction. But your visual memory was like quite excellent. Initially learning the stuff. So when a picture was shown to you and then taken away, you remembered them quite well.
Yeah.
But then you were like not great, like maybe 2 standard deviations lower on your delayed recall because it wasn't meaningful to you.
Yeah. If I was prompt, like the second I saw it, I was like, oh, I know this. I can do it.
Your recognition was over the 75th percentile, so you recognize better than most people do. But your recall was like, and he was just like, I don't know.
Yeah. Like if I had random images just shared to me, even if it wasn't the original one, I would have been able to remember because I would have gotten the prompt.
Yeah. You do benefit from cueing.
Yeah, queuing is
Like, a lot of this seems like very trainable. Like, if only we could break the skill down into specifically what's going on, and then be like, okay, we need to practice this. I'm
So
optimistic for the possibility of trainable.
I
Okay.
agree.
So this is a mistake that occupational therapists often make with people who've had like a stroke or a brain injury or something, where they're like, okay, there's this cognitive test, and this guy is doing poorly on this cognitive test,
Mhm.
but I can train the cognitive test.
Oh yeah, totally
Do the
not
cognitive
bad.
test over and over and over again. until
No,
I get it.
no. But that's psychotech. Like we could do
Ideally, we want to train the skill underlying the cognitive test, obviously.
we want to improve that brain functioning, not that
Yeah.
particular, like, okay, we're just gonna,
You
it
could
doesn't
read
have to be
numbers
the same
better
number.
now. Congratulations.
Lots of
with AI.
different numbers over and over.
You should be able to generate these tests and like all the variations.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to. The problem is you need
You know,
more. You need
The
to
way you
test-
describe the test also reminds me of a friend of mine saw a physiotherapist, and they were like, okay, lift this arm up now, push down here, and then like move the arm over here now like apply weight downwards. And it's like you have to activate a very specific muscle to have your arm out forwards and push downwards. And then like, if it's up here, now push forwards. It's a very other specific muscle. And the physiotherapist uses tests like this to isolate which muscle it is the one with the problem, and then which one needs to be worked on.
Very, very
Why
analogous.
is there no physio for mind stuff? Like, why can't now I have the results and like, okay, like do this training, Daniel?
So
That's what I wanna
made
know.
a
I think we're in
suggestion.
development of that. Like it's gonna take us time to
So
the
they-
ways in which minds are varied and then overlap in each other, and like is it the meaning thing? Is it the interesting thing? Is it there's such a mush that it's very hard to tease it out.
Right. So so they do have tech for this, like things like lumosity, right? Where there are these different brain game type of things.
Is that real? I thought that was BS.
There you go.
Well, is
It doesn't really map on well to improving the way in which that functions in your everyday life.
Right.
The reason why I suggested having like a set like meditative practice that you continue with, for whatever it is at a specific time for a specific amount of time that is not stimulating and just drawing your attention back is because that would be that we know that meditative practices with those kinds of components do help people be able to bring their attention back, right? And keep their attention longer. That's why I suggested it rather than being like, okay, do memorize, I'll just keep
Oh my
saying
god. Can we
Exactly.
teach Daniel to like memorize the order of a deck of playing cards or something? That is the most useless skill that I can think of.
I could do it if you sorted it, like sort it by like smallest.
I would
to
much
highest. I
prefer
could
if
do the whole deck.
you assigned him to do rote things that he doesn't feel like doing that would actually be helpful to our lives.
This is how I
Okay, Daniel, party tricks. I'm gonna teach you all the lamest party tricks.
Yeah,
Here's how to do it.
I'm using the wrong one. I'm like, why isn't this working? Because I'm using a mouse for the wrong computer. That's why. Yeah, do you want to talk about this stuff or not so much?
I don't know.
We don't have to.
I don't know.
More
If I
testing
want.
stuff.
Okay.
There's
Sort of the more mental healthy
mental
stuff.
health
That's more
stuff.
personal.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah,
we can
whatever.
I mean, to be fair, I feel like everybody kind of like it's not gonna be that surprising,
probably not, but it's okay.
but I don't know. I feel like my enemies will use it against me.
I love you and I respect your boundaries.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, so I've like when I saw his childhood psychoeducational assessment, like it was interesting enough that I got his permission to like geek out on it to a bunch of my friends who are in the same field.
Yeah, they're all like, "Oh my god,
Oh my god, like this is so cool, and
which was actually really helpful for me.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
It's like, I guess it removes the stigma if you're all interested in talking about it and fascinated.
Well, it like, because I was like, okay, like for me, I took the test, and like 100% of psychological tests that I've seen are this crazy skew. So like, okay, that's just normal, right? Which was, by the way, like a, you know, like one. There was only one. It was me.
Yeah.
And so for them to have like, I don't know how many tests you guys have done.
In the hundreds.
Done hundreds of tests, and they're like, oh my God, I've never seen one like this. This is crazy. I need to tell my friends.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, that's where I exist within society.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay.
I mean, not to say that this never ever happens with anybody else, but he like, and while we were doing the training, like I spoke to the trainee about how like this is really like a true blue like brain profile. Versus like a lot of the times what we see is like this sort of mixture of like how the person wants to be seen and like what's sort of useful for them, and then also, you know, like it's a sort of a mix of a lot of different stuff, right? But you know,
I remember this is many years ago. It's probably about 5 or 6, but there was some sort of occupational therapeutic test that I did, and there was had a pencil. There was a box on a page about this big, and it was like draw dots was my instruction, and like dots that don't have like a tail off the side, right? Like only a dot. And I remember this as like fine motor control / ability to draw dots, and then obviously to do a dot you kind of want to do them slowly, right? Just a dot, and then they encourage me to do them faster, and then there's a higher error rate. So when you were talking earlier about the error rate, this one came to mind, and I remember at the time being confused as to whether they wanted me to go faster and make more mistakes or go slower and do less mistakes. And the instructions were just very like I was a 6-year-old, right? The instructions like they were like, you have to decide between like less errors, more dots. Like I was like, is it points for every dot I draw, or is it points for every dot I draw without a tail, or is it points for every like dot I do within 10 seconds?
This was like he was giving us like a whole bunch of like a stream of consciousness the whole time.
Help me out here. What is the point of this test so that I know which way to go? Like,
and they can't tell you. It will invalidate the test.
I mean, some of the tests will be completely invalidated if we tell you what we're looking for. Like, literally, the point is for you to figure out what we're looking for,
or to like respond to the prompt as it stands. And so I did slow with dots, and then I did faster with more tails. And I was like, is that better? I don't know. And then it's obviously it's the other person's job to like not reveal whether this was good or bad, because they don't want you to feel bad if you got it wrong. And it was just like the most useless thing I did.
Yeah, they can't give you feedback.
It's not only that, it's also that they don't necessarily know, because it depends on like a whole bunch of different factors, you know, because again, we're like comparing it to like your age and your education and your gender and maybe other stuff sometimes depending on what's going on, right? So the person testing may not really know, unless it's pretty extreme.
But if they had given me like unconditional positive regard, well, like that's great, you know, maybe I would have been happy and like done it, worked harder, rather than like built up some self-conscious energy and going like, oh, I don't know if I'm doing well.
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because like that affects the actual like how people do, as if like the instructor is being good or bad to them.
Yeah, it does.
And so they have to actually like,
but you need to
they have certain encouragement words.
Yeah, we literally do. Like some of the tests are, so it's funny because some of the tests were designed like a long time ago, and they have like these like much more vague instructions. Kind of like how it's the same with like recipes, right? Like if you look at a recipe from like, you know, 1906, they'll just assume that you know to put salt in. It doesn't tell you. Just like, obviously you put salt in, or it says a pinch of salt, right? And now if you look at recipe, it's like, okay, 1/8 of a tablespoon of kosher salt, but blah, 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 right? And so it's the same thing with the tests. So the tests that were designed more recently have like very detailed instructions of exactly how you have to do it. And he's right. That includes the ways in which you are allowed to and not allowed to be encouraging to the examinee. So you can't tell people you're doing great, because that's giving them feedback on their performance, which you may or may not know, which may or may not be accurate. And even if it is accurate, it's not like sort of appropriate to the context, right? But you can say like, you know, I can see that you're working really hard. Like, that's great.
Okay. Oh my God, what a mess. Just, I know that the whole psychological testing field is a mess, and this is just like, it's more of a mess.
The whole thing, I mean, like, we are a bunch of weirdos that we like want to do this in the first place. The people who like want to do it clinically are weird enough, but the people who want to like design these tests are even weirder. And yeah, so there's a lot of, it's a very strange, it's very strange. But
Fascinating all around.
yeah.
Want to be like, thank you for sharing all the like, super interesting. And like, I could probably talk about this for another 3 hours, but maybe we shouldn't.
We probably, but yeah, I'm also curious for your feedback about like how, like, you know, sort of being less familiar with this stuff and not having just gone through the testing for you to like know what I'm talking about specifically. Yeah. Like, how much of this do you feel like you had any idea what the hell I was saying?
I did a couple of courses in psychology in university. Like, I am familiar with the territory. I've been studying brains and minds for quite a while. I don't have the technical language, but I'm like, oh yeah.
That's what I mean. I don't mean that you have like no background in understanding like anything about this.
Oh, I get it.
I don't know how much like I aim like too high or too low, you know?
No,
Like,
it's cool. I get it. It's interesting. So in the meditative field, to the extent that it's a like standardized field, people pick very specific words for what they mean. Like the word attention means a different thing to the word awareness. And
yeah,
they are explicitly like, this one points to that thing and this one points to that thing.
yeah.
And it sounds like in the psychometric testing field, it's less standardized so far, because we're like ancient standardization. Like 2000 years ago, someone declared that this word in this other language means mindfulness means mindfulness, you know? And it's like, so I have that like when like very, very specific mental objects, like bliss means this particular sensation, and then you've got like 17 other people who are all triangulating like what they mean by bliss, but it's really meant to point to a very specific thing. Whereas here we are in psychometric testing saying, well, he can repeat numbers in a backwards string better, but we haven't like nailed exactly what that muscle is that he does or does not have in order to be able to do that task. So I'm looking forward to like psychological testing getting like more specific about what they mean and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, so I think that neuropsychology gets the closest of the possible ways of going, like back to occupational therapy. Occupational therapists also do cognitive testing, but their cognitive testing is much more functional cognitive testing, right? And so you don't get these like, you know, attempts at very, very pure cognitive functions. But even when we attempt to do as pure as we can, it's still not pure. And you can screw up with a particular test from a few different directions, which is one of the reasons why we keep you so damn long doing so much testing, right? Is so that we can, like you were saying, sort of triangulate based on the ways in which you performed across tests to try to see like what the problem is, which is why I came into this with an explanation of like the problem is the, you know, things that are boring. He like are just like Teflon, like it just slides right off of, you know? And I could not see that if I just knew, you know, how many digits he can remember in the order that it was given to him. Like it's only within the pattern of performance across tests that I could see that that's the issue. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I don't know if we're going to get there where you want it to be. It would be lovely.
Well,
there's not a lot of money in creating these like nobody's interested in doing it.
So
Has enough
unfortunately, like from the meditative direction, like the meditation teacher can't have an off day, sort of thing. Like in order to like, you have to teach your student, you need to know yourself well enough that if you're trying to give the instructions on how to meditate to the student, it needs to land, it needs to hit for you where you are, for them where they are, for like there's a whole new level of like getting really good at delivering the test or delivering the meditative instructions. Yeah. Yeah, like so I see that angle and I'm like, oh, we're still trying to like ask the question without being judgy about it. Like say good job without meaning good job, or like good job. Yeah. Like no negative connotation, no, yeah, they're like, but this is also like transpersonal psychology. We're not there yet in psychology that how important it is, like we know it's important that the tester comes from a certain angle, but psychology itself hasn't started sorting out the tester in order to give the test in a particular way. We just let the tester show up on the day and give the test. That's going to be another layer in the field that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we do know, like in the psychotherapy research, for example, we know that the most important factor in the effectiveness of a particular, client's path in psychotherapy is the relationship
right
between
the therapeutic alliance is way bigger than
like
the method
particular worksheets or like what the homework is or like whatever the method, like those things. I mean, there are things that are actively damaging that you shouldn't do, no matter how
like
good a therapist you are or whatever. But but there are many, many effective ways to do things. But the most effective way is to have a good relationship. And I think that it's difficult. It's a difficult skill to maintain a relationship when you're doing this kind of testing, to maintain the relationship with this person who you didn't know before, who is never going to see you again, right? And help them have a reasonably decent time of it emotionally, so that they can like stay with you and do their best, and so that the results of the testing are really reflective of their cognitive strengths and weaknesses, rather than their disinterest, their anger at you, their tiredness, their headache, their, like many, many other intervening factors. But we don't, like that's difficult to standardize and measure. Right?
I'd say something like it's very hard to cut reality at the joints. Like does reality start and finish?
Exactly. So I think that people have tried to address this through these like hyper controlling instructions on how to do the test, so that everybody's getting the same experience. But everybody's not getting the same experience, because like if Daniel was being tested by like my mother, it would have been a very different experience for him. Did the same things.
Honestly, probably would have been interesting.
There's actually
just been like, okay, this is gonna get wild.
Yeah.
So when it comes to typology systems, typology testers can like MBTIs can pick someone's type. Like you can be walking through a crowd and be like, that person's of this type, an introvert, extrovert, the people who run those tests can get very, very, very good at like picking people. But when the other thing is, when it comes to like developmental level systems, your tester can push people down a level or lift people up a level for the test. Like if the tester like is super kind and compassionate, open and curious and all of the good things, they can lift someone's level up and then they'll test highly. And then you can have another tester that's like kind of more judgy and pressury and will push someone's level down. The same like client will test differently depending on the tester.
Right. And so that's why I'm always aiming in terms of my own work and the people who work with me's work, right? To try to be going for like, how can I make it? This is not a comfortable experience. It is a long, stressful, unpleasant day, right? But, you know, how can we make this the most comfortable possible considering the circumstances, right? So that the person can perform as best as they can. Because you're not going to get a 99th percentile, you know, because you're having a good day. Like you actually have to have the cognitive strength to, right?
Yes.
You can score better than your brain can do, right? Unless we're like cheating and just giving you free points, but we don't do that, right? But you can certainly do worse than your best for a lot of reasons, you know, which I don't really want to happen, right? What I really want is for people to be doing their best so that I could see what's actually going on so that I can, you know, help in whatever.
I can see it already. The psychometrics of the future will be like, take someone to their worst and test them there, and like push them onto their best and test them there. Like, this is your range, you know, no longer are you here, you're this kind of person. If put in the like confusing, stressful scenario, this is where you're at. And if you're like
panic attack and then
and then like make them repeat numbers backwards or something. That's the spirit.
But I have conversations with people. I have conversations with people where they come in and they're like, something like really bad has just happened, right? Or whatever, or they're like not sure if they really want to be there or whatever. And I like, okay, look, I mean, I know you waited for this assessment and like you want to get it done and you want to like cooperate and everything like that. But like, given what you and me sitting here together right now, like, I don't think this is gonna work, you know? Like I mean, we can go ahead if that's what you want to do, right? But like, honestly, I don't think you're like, what's happening in your, like your brain function is gonna show up. Like what's gonna show up is that you're super upset, bad day. Right?
You know, I could just go ahead and fail you right now if you want.
Yeah, like you're having an awful day and you're
failed. It doesn't even have a brain.
Well, so that's a whole different problem. I mean, if you want me to go into that, that's a whole different thing. But but you could still have, I mean, if you're like really exceptionally scoring low in a way that doesn't make sense, so that's a validity issue, right? But you can end up with your scores being affected, not like going like from, you know, 75th percentile to first percentile, but, you know, like 75th to 50th or whatever, because you're having an awful day and you're like super upset or whatever it is. So yeah.